She married an Englishman. My father was very English, and so her children grew up English. So forgive the fact that we were in a Dutch Reformed church and the service is predominantly in English. But I'm sure we don't mind that. Anyway, so it's very difficult to say, to bring, honor to my mother. I could stand here and speak about her all day, but of course I can't do that. So I think there are just two things that I want to focus on that stand out to me about my mother. The first is that she was a woman of God. That was almost her most defining characteristic. That her whole life, as far back as I could find out about her, was devoted. She had a calling to serve the Lord. In fact, when she was still at school, she was inspired to become a missionary. They grew up, well, not only, in the Northern Cape. My father was a farmer. They ended up in a place called Eiland, which was a little island just outside Uppington in the Orange River. And that community was very much sort of supported by the NG Kerk. So the school and the church were kind of collaborated. And she had counselling from the Dominee there and about this fact that she felt called to become a missionary. But this little school only went up, I think, to standard 6 or standard 8, I'm not sure. So she would have had to go to Bible College in Wellington, which meant she had to go to Uppington, to the courses, to finish matric. And her father refused. He said, no, you stay at home. You're the oldest daughter, your job is to stay at home and help your mother. So the Dominee went and spoke to my papa to convince him to allow my mother to go to Uppington and finish matric. The idea was she was going to go to college and become a missionary. But then he wouldn't let her go to college. So my mother, the silent rebel, she was very polite on the surface, but she was very determined to do what she wanted. She said, no, well, she's not going to stay in the kitchen and help her mother. So she joined the post office and she was selected to be trained as a telegrapher. So she became a telegrapher. And then not long after that, she joined Barclays Bank. And my father was the bank manager there, and that's where the two met and fell in love. So then her life took a slightly different course. And her calling, became obviously entwined with that of her husband. But this sense of wanting to work for God was always there. It never left her. So she served God, first of all, in the way that she loved my father and she loved her children, and how she worked in the church in a very humble way, in any way she could. She was in the Vrouwendienst, she would make flower arrangements, she would work for the bazaar. I remember when we were little, my mother was always in the kitchen making fudge and cakes and things, and we would come in and say, ooh, and we'd try and grab a piece. And she'd go, yeah, los, dis vir die cake. So we were never allowed to have any of the nice treats. No, that's not true. We also got lots of nice treats. But anyway, so that, in her own way, she found a way of serving God, of living out that calling that she always had in her life. And then she, this post as scriba opened up in 1973. And she applied for it and she became, I don't know what a scriba is in English, a secretary, I suppose? She became the secretary of this church. And she worked here for many years, and she dedicated herself to the people that worked here. Come up afterwards and see the photo of her and all the Dwimbies that she worked with over the years. And they loved her. They used to call her Moedertjie, because she was like a mother to them in so many ways, and to their families. And she did things for this church. She planted roses outside. I don't know who of you were here in Graaff-Reinet long enough to remember the whole church was surrounded by beautiful red roses. That was my mum, and she discovered in one of the storerooms a collection of old silver that had become tarnished and dusty. She polished up that silver, and people like astounded. They didn't know the church had this, this legacy of really valuable, I think it was 18th century or 19th century collection of silver. And that became one of the major tourist attractions here, this collection of silver. So she was always thinking of ways in which she could, do something more. I was looking through the photo albums and seeing, the notes that came from the different dominees over the years, saying how she'd gone out of her way to do this or that. She would always go the extra mile. That's how dedicated she was to her calling. And then when she retired, and my father had passed away, she was alone for about 10 years. And in that time, she decided she was going to study. Her children had just left home, my dad had just died, and she was all alone. And she decided that she was going to embark on her next project, which was to study doing the job that she'd been doing. She went to Wellington College and she got qualified, and I was looking at the results that she got for this diploma that she did, diploma in kerksaakgelastigheid. 80 this, 90 that, it was all, she got distinctions for all the subjects. She was amazing. But she never even told us that this is what happened, that she passed this thing with flying colours. Well, that was my mom, It's like Jesus said, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. She just did it without ever seeking recognition or glory for it. She just followed the example of Jesus in everything she did. And then she met an old school friend of hers who had also recently become widowed, a dominee from PE. They had actually grown up together in Cornelia, so they had been good friends, when they were children. And so the dominee started calling on my mom, dominee Willem Etsebeth, from Blue Water Bay in Etsebeth. And eventually the two married. So her next step in her journey with God was to become predikantsvrou. And she did that amazingly, She had such a lasting impact. A lot of the people from Blue Water Bay, where Etsebeth was the serving minister, have spoken to us about how amazing my mom was and what she did for that congregation and how she served them in so many ways. And and then she, after Dominee Etsebeth died, shortly after that she decided to move from Graaff-Reinet, and she moved into a retirement village in Port Elizabeth, which was very nice for me because she was just around the corner from my house. So we visited a lot. But she carried on with a sense of, I've got to do something for God. And she was hardly there, and she said to me, for example, she said that the frail care facility is so depressing. It looks like such a sad place. I need to do something to make this a happier place. So she would go, without telling anybody, she would go buy expensive flowers at Woolies and whatever, and she would make the most beautiful flower arrangements and put it in their lounge. Or she would take them like cookies or rusks or scones or something. And in the beginning, nobody knew who it was that was doing this. It was like a secret Santa that was putting stuff down there. And eventually they figured out that it was my mother, So again, that is, the way Jesus said, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Just do it. That was my mom. And she also became the leader of that retirement village, and in fact the one next to it as well. There are lots of old age homes in South Australia where we live. They were all part of the Swimmerstrand in Groot Kerk. But the old people would have their own little prayer meetings and stuff. And Nachmal and so on. And then my mother became, I suppose, like a kind of an ouderling or coordinator or whatever she was. And she would organise these meetings. She would liaise with the dominee. She would make sure the table was laid and there was beautiful flowers there. And she would bake scones for the tea afterwards. You know, she just made everything nice. That was what my mother always did. She made everything beautiful and she made everybody enjoy themselves. And the dominees had such a high regard for her, you know, because she was such a dedicated servant of the Lord in every way that she could. But then, of course, she had a stroke, which it was 4.5 years ago, and that changed everything, you know. She couldn't do anything anymore. She went to live at a frail care facility called Lilydale. Where's Janelle? There she is, Janelle and some of her carers, and they looked after Mom when Mom could no longer, you know, arrange flowers or bake cakes or serve God in that way. But apart from that, that's the one thing I wanted to say. What a wonderful servant of God she was. And what an example she was to all of us in that sense, you know. The other thing about her, and this is why I asked Derek to put that particular verse that we've put onto the cover of her crypt outside on the wall of remembrance. I said, take verse 26 of Proverbs chapter 21. The righteous give without sparing. There's one thing about my mother, well, I've alluded to it actually already, is how incredibly generous she was. How she would just give without counting the cost. To her children, to her grandchildren, she gave whatever she could. She handed out to people. And she would often, people wouldn't even know that she had done it, you know. So she was amazing in that respect. If I just think of all the things she gave me and my children over the years, and that was, she did the same for every one of her children and her grandchildren. She gave, I remember when we were little, we lived in Lombard Street and we had all these fruit trees, peach trees and a huge apricot tree and grapes and figs and quinces and goodness knows what all. My mother would be in the kitchen canning fruit and making jam, and she would take, and not keep it to herself, she would hand this out to everybody in the community. Everybody would get a bottle of jam or a bottle of canned peaches. You know, it was just this generosity in her that it was just overflowing in her. That was always there. And that is, I think, her most lasting legacy. That she left with us this example of what you do when you're a child of God. Yeah. How you serve others. She never stopped serving others. I think the best way to bring that message across is to read some of the little notes. You know, when she turned 90 a couple of years ago, Patsy's daughter-in-law Tanya had this idea to take a jar, and each of us, well, those of us that were at the party, to write a little message for her and put it in this jar. So the other day I got this blue jar out and I started reading all the little notes. But there's so many I couldn't read them all, or at least bring them all along, but I took a couple of them just to get the idea of how special she was to her children. But the most precious thing about my mom was what a special relationship she had with each of her grandchildren. And in a certain respect, how she had a different relationship with each grandchild. depending who they were. So this one's from Brent Light, Kenneth's son. Brent Light writes, puppet shows and cone heads. From playing silly buggers with puppets to laughing at our cone heads' reflection in the oven. At Sunday lunch, the oven would make your head go pointy. Your home is a place, your home, this is Granny's home, is a place of kindness and your love is unconditional. Congratulations. And here's one from Patsy's son Cameron. Dear Granny Joe, I will always have memories of eating a Tupperware full of your delicious guzzly cookies that you made especially for me. Cameron loved guzzly cookies. Guzzly, called them guzzly cookies, they were actually custard cookies. Whilst listening to the song, I was born in a taxi cab. That part I don't remember, but anyway. You are the most devout and faultless human being that I know. So much so that you give Mother Teresa and the Pope a run for their money. I truly mean that. I always wanted to tell you that, but never got the chance.
Oh, sweet.
Isn't that lovely? Okay, and here's one by Rebecca, Derek's daughter. The time when Granny lived with us, she lived in Graaff-Reinet before she moved to the old age home called Elizabeth, lived with us was so precious. When you see someone every day, they become so much a part of your world that you don't notice how special the time is. I remember vanilla cupcakes and made-up stories before bed. I would always demand Granny make up a new one instead of demanding the classic bedtime stories. Granny always obliged. I was lucky to have a childhood with so many parents to put me to bed. Granny made sure I went to sleep knowing I was loved, cherished and prayed for every night.
Oh, precious.
Beautiful Vicky.
Sweet.
And here's one from Derek's other daughter, Jackie, and her two children, Lila and Claude. Dearest Granny Joe, some of my fondest memories of you are your beautiful garden. Oh, that's something that I never said, that I should have said. My mom had the most stunningly beautiful garden, and she would get up at the crack of dawn before work and spend hours in her garden. Your beautiful garden, your peanut butter balls, and your magic medicine. And what was Granny's magic medicine? We hated it. TCP. If you had a sore place on your leg, TCP. If you had a sore throat, gargle TCP. Oh, and we hated it. The smell of it used to make us sick. Here's a letter from my daughter Liska, who was singing. In fact, there are a couple from Liska. I'm just going to read the little PSs actually. Dear Granny, I'll always remember how you taught me to mix Rice Krispies and strawberry yogurt. Still one of my favourite breakfasts. And here's another one. I'll always remember how fancy you are.
Aww.
And that she was. My mother was always dressed absolutely impeccably, and her hair was always, and she would have little high heel shoes on, little tailored jackets, wherever she went. She never looked sloppy. Not like her two daughters.
Yeah.
I don't know where we came from. We didn't live up to Mommy's high standards when it came to dress. And I remember one day we were walking through a shopping centre in Port Elizabeth, my mother and I, and this lady that we didn't even know walked past us, and she came up to my mom and she said, "Oh, you are so beautiful."
No.
And that she was a beautiful woman, and she was always beautifully turned out, So like Liska says, I will always remember how fancy you are. You are a true lady and such a strong role model to me.
Precious.
There's another lovely one from Gareth and Candace, Derek's son and daughter-in-law. Hi, Gran. And this is now an example of my mother doing things without the left hand knowing what the right hand is doing. Gareth writes, Hi, Gran. Only recently did I know that when I was 13 and had the chance to go on the exchange program to the UK, that you helped us by buying my air ticket to the UK.
Aww.
I would like to thank you for that, as I haven't had the opportunity to do so properly.
Oh, precious. Precious.
And here is one from Joni, Kenneth's daughter, and her family. Joni's husband Sean writes, "One of my fondest memories of you is watching you dance with Lake. Lake is Joni's youngest daughter." Is that picture up there?
It was.
Last Christmas. And then Lily, the older daughter, writes, "Happy birthday, Granny Jo. I love that you have the same short name, Joni and Joey, or Joe, which is called Granny Jo, which was short for her real name, which was Johanna Cornelia, but nobody called her that." So Joni, I don't know if you also named after Granny Jo. So Lily says, "I love that you have the short name, same short name as my name, and that you are so kind. I remember when we came to your house last, I was feeling so sick, and you were so kind and made me feel safe."
Oh, precious.
And then there's Joni writes, "So many years of memories, but some of my fondest ones are of stays with you in your old Graaff-Reinet home, playing in the garden with Devon and often Jackie and Gareth, pretending there was a troll under the bridge." And my mum and dad had a little bridge in their garden. Oh, never mind.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Playing in the furrows and hearing you shout, "Lunch is ready, wash your hands," from the kitchen door. And boy, it was lunch ready. There was another thing that my mom was a master at, was cooking the most delicious lunches. Roasts, sweet carrots and potatoes, and the most beautifully laid tables. And then Joni's youngest daughter, little Lake. She must have been very young at the time of Granny's 90th birthday. "This is so precious, and I want to finish with this." She sings, "Happy birthday, Granny Jo. You always look nice and blinky." And this is true, you know. Granny was always dressed to the nines. She always looked so grand, and she had costume jewellery on. So this little girl thought of Granny as a very blinky person.
Precious. Okay. Do you want
That
to
was
pick
the
that
blinky
up?
Granny that we
Do you want to
remember.
help?
No.
She won't be able to
So-
bend.
Can I do it? Sure, I'll get it.
What can I say? I love my mother very, very much. We all did. And we're going to miss her. But she's at peace now. Her body was finished, you know, and life wasn't a pleasure for her anymore. Cornelia and her carers can attest to how difficult things got for Granny towards the end, how she struggled. She couldn't walk, she couldn't talk. So I am at peace, and I'm sure all of our family, that she is finally, can I just say this, Mummy? We brought you home. We brought you to this place that you loved, where you wanted to be. She often said to me, "I want to go back to Graaff-Reinet." So we finally got a chance to bring her back and to put her to rest here, and to hope, or shall I say know, that she will rest in peace. Because this was her spiritual home. And she will be happy that she's been laid to rest here. Okay, thank you.